When I married Emily nearly 10 years ago, I thought I had hit the jackpot. She was beautiful, sharp-witted, and quick to make friends wherever she went. Her charm was the kind that disarmed people instantly. She could walk into a room and have everyone laughing in minutes. People admired her, and I felt lucky. I genuinely thought we were the couple everyone else aspired to be. We had two amazing kids, Tyler and Sophie, a house that felt like a warm, cozy home, and a life that seemed steady and fulfilled. But recently, things had started to feel off. Nothing obvious, just subtle shifts that only someone who's been deeply connected to another person for years would notice. It started with her schedule. Emily's job as a project manager kept her busy, but lately, she was working late a lot more than usual. At first, I didn't question it. She's always been ambitious, and with everything being more competitive these days, I figured she was just pushing herself. Still, I offered to help out more with the kids, thinking that taking some pressure off her would let her focus on her career. Then there were the late-night texts. She'd be sitting on the couch next to me, her face glowing in the light of her phone screen, fingers flying across the keyboard with a smile on her face. I'd catch her chuckling softly, sometimes even blushing. Naturally, I was curious and asked who she was talking to. She always had a quick answer: her friend Lisa from work, or her colleague Mark who needed advice on a project. She would shrug it off so casually, as if I was being silly for even wondering. At first, I believed her. But then her stories started to sound rehearsed, like she was pulling from a script. When I asked her questions about these friends or her late nights, her answers were always smooth, almost too smooth. My gut told me something was wrong, but I told myself I was just overthinking. Emily was my wife, the mother of our children. There was no way she'd betray me like that. But the unease grew stronger every day. I began to feel like an intruder in my own home, like I was standing on the outside of our marriage, looking in at something I no longer recognized. The final straw, though, the moment that pushed me from uneasy suspicion to cold certainty, came on a night I'll never forget. It was our daughter Sophie's 6th birthday, and we'd thrown a small family gathering to celebrate. Emily was acting strange all evening, a bit more jittery than usual, laughing too hard at jokes and disappearing into her phone every chance she got. I tried not to let it bother me, tried to focus on Sophie's smile as she opened her presents. But then, while Emily was showing me something on her phone, a text notification popped up from someone saved as a. It said, "I love you more." I froze. My heart hammered in my chest as I looked at her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who's that from?" I asked, forcing a smile, trying to play it cool for the sake of our family and the other guests. She barely missed a beat. "Oh, that's just Mark," she said with a dismissive laugh. "He's going through a tough time, and I've been helping him out." I nodded slowly, trying to convince myself it was nothing, that her story made sense. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing fast. The party wrapped up late that night, and after everyone left, Emily seemed tense. She finally turned to me with a look I'll never forget. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, almost as if she was afraid of her own words. I braced myself, feeling my stomach knot as she continued. "Remember the text you saw earlier? It wasn't from Mark, and it wasn't exactly what I said it was," she confessed, her eyes flickering with guilt and something that looked like resentment. "There's someone else. It started 6 months ago, during a rough patch you were going through." I felt my world tilt on its axis, like reality was suddenly too slippery to hold on to. "Someone else?" I repeated, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "What do you mean, someone else?" Emily crossed her arms, not even meeting my eyes, and continued in this cold, rehearsed tone. "I didn't plan for this to happen, okay? It just did. We were friends at first, and then it turned into something more. I haven't been happy, John. Not for a long time. I didn't think you'd ever understand." She said it like she was reading from a script, like she'd practiced this speech 100 times in her head before finally spilling it out in front of me. She went on to explain that she hadn't been intimate with him, just that they'd gotten close in a way that made her question our whole marriage. Her words were carefully chosen, designed to downplay what she'd done, to make it seem like an innocent, emotional connection. But I could see right through her. I knew she was lying. I could feel it in my bones. I didn't sleep that night. Emily slipped into bed beside me, but it felt like there was a canyon between us, one she had carved with her lies. My mind spun with a mix of anger, disbelief, and this crushing sadness that weighed down my chest. I kept replaying her words, trying to make sense of them, but they felt hollow, rehearsed. It was as if she wasn't even sorry. The next morning, I decided I needed answers. I couldn't just sit in silence, pretending everything was okay. So, when Emily left the house to take the kids to school, I went straight to her phone. She'd been careful, deleting most of her messages, but she wasn't as clever as she thought. I found a few stray texts that had slipped through, all from a number saved as A. They were short, cryptic messages like, "Can't wait to see you later," and "Last night was amazing." My hands shook as I read them. It was all the confirmation I needed. She was lying about everything. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like an idiot. I'd been faithful, committed, and I'd always put her happiness first. But here she was, sneaking around with some guy behind my back. The worst part? She still hadn't told me the whole truth. She was still hiding the extent of it, as if she thought I was too stupid to put the pieces together. That night, I confronted her again. "Emily, I know it's not just an innocent friendship," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though inside I felt like I was barely hanging on. "I saw the messages. Don't lie to me. I need the truth. Who is he?" For a moment, she looked startled, her mask slipping. But then, just as quickly, she composed herself, crossing her arms and narrowing her eyes at me, almost as if I was the one at fault. "His name is Adam," she said coolly. "We met through one of the kids' extracurricular activities. We just connected." She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she hadn't just ripped my heart out and stomped on it. "Connected?" I scoffed. "Connected? Is that what you call sneaking around behind your husband's back?" I could feel the anger building, the betrayal bubbling up until it threatened to spill over. "Emily, you lied to me. You looked me in the eyes, and you lied." She rolled her eyes, as if I was making a big deal out of nothing. "Oh, come on, John. You haven't exactly been Mr. Perfect, either. You've been moody, withdrawn, caught up in your own world. I needed someone who was actually there for me. Adam understood me in a way you haven't in years." I stood there, stunned by her audacity. She was trying to make it my fault, trying to paint herself as the victim. It was almost surreal. I wanted to scream, to shake her and ask how she could be so cold, so callous. But instead, I took a deep breath and asked, "Did you ever think about what this would do to us? To the kids?" She sighed, an exasperated sound that made my blood boil. "Honestly, John, don't try to make this about the kids. They'll be fine. And frankly, maybe it's better this way. They deserve to see their parents happy, even if that means we're happier apart." It was like I was seeing a side of her I'd never known existed, a part of her that was selfish and calculating, willing to burn everything down just to justify her actions. I realized in that moment that I wasn't just dealing with a one-time mistake. Emily had made a choice. She'd chosen this guy, this affair, over our family, over me. "Do you even love me anymore?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Part of me already knew the answer, but I needed to hear her say it. I needed to know if there was any chance of salvaging the ruins of our marriage. Emily looked at me, her expression blank, and shrugged. "I don't know, John. I mean, I care about you. But love? I don't know. I don't feel the way I used to." There it was. The truth, raw and unfiltered. It hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. I'd spent years building a life with this woman, and now she was standing in front of me, telling me it all meant nothing to her. I could barely breathe, barely think. But instead of feeling sorry, instead of offering any kind of remorse, Emily just watched me, as if she was waiting for me to say something, waiting for me to let her off the hook. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. "Fine," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "If that's how you feel, then maybe you're right. Maybe this marriage is over." She didn't even flinch. No tears, no pleading, no second thoughts. She just nodded, as if we were discussing some minor inconvenience rather than the end of a decade-long marriage. I couldn't believe it. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd devoted my life to, was gone, replaced by this cold, unfeeling stranger. And that was just the beginning. I thought I'd hit rock bottom after that conversation, but I was wrong. That wasn't even close to the lowest point. I found out just how far she was willing to go only a few days later, on my own birthday, of all days. Emily had arranged a surprise birthday party for me, something she'd never done before. Our closest friends, some family, and even a few of our neighbors were there. For a moment, as I walked in and everyone shouted, "Surprise!" I almost believed it was real, that maybe Emily was trying to make up for everything. Maybe she did care. Maybe she was trying to make things right, trying to remember what we once had. But as the evening went on, her performance began to crack. She was doing her usual, smiling, laughing, making small talk, making sure everyone else was comfortable while keeping her distance from me. At one point, she disappeared to the back of the house, her phone in hand. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on enjoying the party, but I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that something was off. So I made an excuse, telling a friend I'd be right back, and slipped down the hallway to see where she'd gone. That's when I heard her voice, low and hushed, coming from the guest bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I peeked in, my stomach churning as I saw her standing by the window, talking quietly on the phone. I know, she whispered, sounding irritated. Just a few more hours and I'll be out of here. I'll meet you after, okay? I love you too. My blood turned to ice. I love you too. Those words echoed in my head, twisting like a knife in my gut. Here she was, planning her rendezvous with Adam while hosting a birthday party for her husband. I felt my hands clench into fists, my jaw tighten. I wanted to burst into the room, to confront her right there, but something stopped me. I didn't want to make a scene in front of our friends, to let them see me unravel. I went back to the living room, my face probably pale as a ghost, my mind racing. Emily came out a few minutes later, perfectly composed, like nothing had happened. She gave me a little smile, touched my arm lightly as if she was the loving wife she pretended to be. It took everything in me not to recoil from her touch. She was putting on a show, playing the perfect wife in front of everyone, while secretly planning to meet her lover once the charade was over. But it got worse. Oh, it got so much worse. As the night wound down and guests began to leave, one of my buddies, Mike, pulled me aside. "Hey man," he said, glancing over his shoulder to make sure Emily wasn't nearby. "I didn't want to bring this up, but you okay? Emily's been acting kinda weird, don't you think?" I could feel the anger boiling up again, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's just, I saw her talking to that guy Adam a couple of times when she thought no one was looking. You know, the kid's soccer coach? It was, I don't know, it didn't seem like just a friendly chat, if you know what I mean." Hearing his name out loud, confirmed by someone else, made it real in a way I hadn't fully accepted until then. Adam, our son's soccer coach. The guy who was supposed to be a positive influence for Tyler, teaching him teamwork and discipline, not sneaking around with his mother behind my back. I couldn't believe the betrayal extended that far, into our family life, into our kids' lives. I thanked Mike, trying not to show how much his words had rattled me, and waited until the last guest had left before I confronted her. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I was done pretending. I needed her to know that I knew. "Emily," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, as she closed the door behind our last friend. "Why don't you tell me more about your friendship with Adam?" She froze, her face flashing with panic for just a split second before she recovered, crossing her arms and narrowing her eyes at me. "Oh, don't start with this again, John. You're just being paranoid." "Paranoid?" I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "I heard you, Emily. I heard you telling him you'd meet him tonight, during my birthday party." I could feel my voice breaking, my chest tightening with a mix of rage and heartbreak. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" You threw a party for me while planning to sneak off with him the second it was over. Her expression changed then, morphing from defensive to something darker, something I hadn't seen before. She looked almost amused. Oh, please, John. Don't act like a victim. This isn't just about me. You've been miserable to live with for months. I just found happiness somewhere else, somewhere you couldn't give it to me. Her voice was cold, detached, like she was discussing some minor inconvenience rather than her husband's shattered heart. I could barely process what she was saying. Happiness? I echoed, feeling a surge of anger rise up. You mean cheating, lying, betraying your own family? That's what you call happiness? Emily shrugged, completely unbothered. Call it whatever you want. But don't pretend you didn't play a part in this. You shut me out a long time ago, John. You're the one who changed. I just adapted. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. She was turning this around on me, making it my fault. And the worst part? She actually seemed to believe it. There was no remorse, no apology, nothing but contempt in her eyes as she looked at me, like I was the one who had failed her, like I was the one to blame. I couldn't take it anymore. You know what, Emily? I said, my voice shaking. I'm done. I've been here, faithful, loyal, fighting for our family while you've been sneaking around with some guy behind my back. But if this is who you really are, then I want nothing to do with it. I'm done. She rolled her eyes, unfazed, and started walking towards the bedroom. Fine. Do whatever you want, John. Just don't expect me to apologize for finally putting myself first. As she walked away, I realized that the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman I'd built my life with, was gone. Or maybe she'd never really been there at all. I stood in the empty living room, the remnants of my own birthday party scattered around me, feeling like a fool, feeling like my entire marriage had been a lie. I was angry, devastated, and completely lost. But in that moment, one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let her keep doing this to me. I didn't know what my next steps would be, but I knew I was done living in denial. And that was the start of the end. The morning after the party, I woke up feeling like I was still trapped in a nightmare. Emily was already up, bustling around the kitchen, acting like nothing had happened, like our lives hadn't just been ripped apart by her confession. She hummed quietly to herself as she poured coffee, not even looking my way when I walked into the room. I couldn't understand it. How could she act so casual, so unbothered? It was like she had this ability to just compartmentalize everything. Our marriage, our family, even her own betrayal, putting it all in neat little boxes and shutting them away without a second thought. Meanwhile, I felt like I was drowning, barely able to breathe under the weight of what she'd done. But she didn't seem to care. We went through the morning routine in silence. I took the kids to school, doing my best to put on a brave face for them, pretending that everything was fine. Tyler kept asking if I was okay, looking at me with this worried expression that nearly broke me. I wanted to tell him everything, to explain why Daddy looked so tired and sad, but I couldn't. They didn't deserve to be dragged into this mess. They deserved better. When I got back home, I decided I needed answers. Real answers. Emily's lies and half-truths weren't enough anymore. I needed to know who this Adam guy really was and how far their affair had gone. So I started digging. I went through our cell phone records, scanning for any numbers that popped up repeatedly. Sure enough, there it was, Adam's number, over and over again, at all hours of the day and night. They'd been talking more than she'd ever talked to me. It was like a knife twisting in my gut with every text and call I saw. But the worst part? The messages went back almost 6 months. 6 months. She'd been lying to me for half a year, carrying on with this guy while I was clueless, still thinking we were a team. I kept scrolling through the records, each call and text a reminder of how deeply she'd betrayed me. And then I found something that made my stomach turn. Not only had she been texting and calling him, but she'd been using a messaging app one didn't even know she had. I'd always known Emily was good with technology, but I'd never thought she'd use that knowledge to hide things from me. The more I found, the worse it got. I discovered that she'd been seeing him on weekends when she told me she was going to catch up with friends or run errands. I remembered a Saturday when she'd come home late, smelling like a new perfume I'd never smelled on her before. She'd brushed it off as something she tried at a department store with her friend, Lisa. Now I knew it was another lie. I thought about all the little moments like that, all the times I'd ignored my gut instincts, brushed off the small warning signs, convinced myself I was just being paranoid. Looking back, the signs were all there, but I'd been too blinded by trust to see them. By the time Emily got home from work that evening, I was ready to confront her again. She walked in, saw me sitting at the kitchen table with her phone records spread out in front of me, and froze. Her face paled as she realized I knew the full extent of her lies. "I went through the phone records, Emily," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I know it's been 6 months. I know you've been sneaking around every chance you get. So I'm asking you, one last time, tell me the truth. All of it." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of remorse in her eyes. But then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by that same defiant, unapologetic look she'd given me the night before. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms and meeting my gaze without a hint of guilt. "You want the truth?" "Yes, I've been seeing Adam for 6 months. And yes, it's serious. More serious than anything I've ever had with you." Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I could barely process them, barely breathe as she continued. "I haven't been happy with you for years, John. Years. I just didn't have the courage to admit it until I met him. He makes me feel alive in a way you never have. He understands me. He listens to me. I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not when I'm with him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was rewriting our entire marriage, twisting every memory, every moment we'd shared, as if they'd all been lies. "So what was I to you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just a placeholder? Something to keep you busy until you found someone better?" She shrugged, not even bothering to soften the blow. "Maybe. I don't know. I cared about you, sure, but it was never the kind of love I wanted. Not the kind of love I feel with him." It felt like my whole world was crumbling around me. All those years, all those moments we'd shared, now tainted by her words, by her betrayal. I felt like a fool for loving her, for trusting her, for giving her everything I had, only to be tossed aside like I was nothing. But the worst part was yet to come. As if her confession wasn't enough, she went on, almost as if she was enjoying twisting the knife. "And you know what, John? I don't regret it. Not one bit. You were never going to be the kind of man I needed. You're predictable, boring, always doing the right thing. It's suffocating. I want someone who makes me feel alive, someone who isn't afraid to take risks." I felt the anger building inside me, a white-hot rage unlike anything I'd ever felt before. She wasn't just leaving me. She was tearing down everything I thought I knew about us, everything I thought I knew about her. She wasn't even trying to let me down gently. She was relishing every moment of my pain. "Emily, do you even hear yourself?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Do you realize what you're saying? We have a family, a life. You're throwing it all away for some guy you barely know." She laughed, a cold, mocking sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, please, John, don't pretend you care about this family. You're just afraid of being alone. That's all this is. You can't stand the thought of losing control, of not being in charge of every little detail." Her words cut deeper than any physical wound could. She was tearing me down, stripping me of everything I thought I was, making me feel like nothing more than a pathetic, abandoned shell of a man. And she didn't care. She was walking away without a second thought, leaving me broken and alone. As she gathered her things to leave, she glanced back at me one last time, her eyes cold and unfeeling. "I'll be staying at Adam's tonight, and don't bother calling. I'll come back tomorrow to talk about the kids, but that's it. We're done here, John." And just like that, she walked out the door, leaving me alone in the quiet, empty house we'd once shared. I stood there, staring at the door, feeling like my entire life had just been ripped out from under me. Everything I thought I knew, everything I thought I had, was gone. That night, after Emily left, I sat alone in our empty house, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. It was surreal. One day, I was a husband and father in a stable home. In the next, my whole life was shattered. She'd left so calmly, without a second glance, like I was nothing more than an inconvenience she was finally rid of. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, something I rarely did. The warmth dulled the edge of my anger, but it did nothing for the aching hollow in my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her cold, smug smile as she told me she didn't regret a thing. I thought about all the years I'd invested in our life together, the sacrifices I'd made, the times I'd put her needs above mine. And for what? To be told I was predictable, boring, and not enough? The memories flooded back. Family vacations, lazy Sunday mornings, quiet nights after the kids had gone to bed when it was just the two of us. I thought they'd meant something to her, that we'd built something real together. But now I was starting to wonder if it had all been a lie. Had she ever really loved me? Or had she just been waiting for an excuse to leave, for someone like Adam to come along and make her feel alive? I barely slept. The next morning, I was a wreck, but I knew I couldn't let the kids see me like this. I needed to be strong for them, to hold things together while their mother chased whatever thrill she thought she deserved. Tyler and Sophie were my only focus now, the only part of my life that hadn't completely fallen apart. I texted Emily to ask when she'd be back to discuss arrangements for the kids. Her response was infuriatingly casual. "I'll come by around 4. We need to set some boundaries, John." Boundaries? After everything she'd done, now she was the one demanding boundaries? She showed up later that afternoon, dressed in one of those outfits she only wore when she wanted to impress. Jeans that hugged her just right, a low-cut blouse, her hair and makeup perfectly done. She looked like she was ready for a date, and my blood boiled at the thought of her going straight to Adam after leaving here. She barely acknowledged me as she walked in, heading straight to the living room where she sank onto the couch, looking around as if the house already felt foreign to her. "So," she began, her tone all business, "I think we need to establish a schedule for the kids and figure out who's keeping the house." I sat across from her, gripping the edge of the coffee table to keep myself steady.
"The house,"
I repeated, feeling the anger simmering just below the surface. "Emily, I built this life for us, for you, for our kids, and now you just expect me to walk away?" She rolled her eyes, an expression so filled with contempt it almost took my breath away. "John, don't act like I'm asking for something unreasonable. We're over. This marriage is over. I need my own space, and so do you." I felt the words bubbling up, things I'd been too afraid to say, too desperate to keep the peace, but I couldn't hold them back anymore. "You're unbelievable. You know that? You've been cheating on me for half a year, sneaking around with our son's soccer coach, and you think you get to decide who keeps the house? You think you get to just take our family and walk away like it's nothing?" Her gaze hardened. "Oh, grow up, John. It's not just about you. You're so wrapped up in your own little world that you don't even see how miserable I've been. And don't act like you're the victim here. You're the one who's been emotionally checked out for years. I was just filling the void you left." I couldn't believe her audacity. Checked out? Are you kidding me? I've been here, Emily. I've been here, raising our kids, taking care of you, giving you everything I had. And you repaid me by sneaking around with Adam? How is that my fault? She sighed, looking at me with that same disdain, as if I was just some obstacle in her path. "I'm not going to argue with you about this. I've already moved on, John. You should too." "Moved on?" I laughed bitterly. "You think it's that easy? You think you can just erase a decade of marriage and walk into some new life without a second thought?" Her expression didn't change. If anything, she seemed irritated that I wasn't accepting this as easily as she was. "Look, John, I didn't come here to argue. I came here to make this easier for everyone, especially the kids. But if you're going to keep clinging to the past, then maybe you're the one who needs to reevaluate things." I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. The woman sitting across from me was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. The Emily I knew would never be this heartless, this cruel. She would never abandon her family for the sake of feeling alive. But the Emily I knew was gone, replaced by this cold, selfish person who didn't seem to care about anyone but herself. And in that moment, I realized something. There was no saving this. There was no fixing what she'd broken. She'd made her choice, and it was clear she didn't regret it. Fine, I said quietly, barely able to look at her. You want out? You can have it. But I'm not letting you walk all over me. I'm going to fight for my kids, for my home. And if you think you're going to leave this marriage without any consequences, you're wrong. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but she quickly masked it, crossing her arms defensively. Do whatever you want, John. But this is happening whether you like it or not. I stood up, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I was done pleading, done trying to understand. She'd made her bed, and now she'd have to live with the fallout. I hope he's worth it, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. I hope Adam gives you everything you think you're missing. With that, I walked out of the room, leaving her sitting alone on the couch. I didn't want to hear her response. I didn't want to see her smug face or listen to her try to justify her actions anymore. I'd finally reached my breaking point, and there was no going back. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, I sat down and started researching divorce lawyers. It felt surreal, typing those words, taking that first step toward ending what I thought would be a lifetime commitment. But I knew it was the only way forward. Emily had killed whatever love was left between us, and I couldn't let her drag me down any further. The thought of a custody battle scared me. I didn't want my kids caught in the middle of this mess, forced to choose between parents. But if Emily was going to keep seeing Adam, if she was going to bring him into my children's lives, I couldn't stand by and let that happen without a fight. The rage was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was tempered now by something else, determination. I was done letting her walk all over me, done letting her dictate my life. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had a purpose, a reason to push forward. If she wanted out, fine. But I wasn't going to let her destroy everything I'd worked for. Not without a fight. And I was only just beginning. In the days that followed, I felt like I was operating on autopilot. I'd taken my first steps toward divorce, meeting with a lawyer named David, an old friend of Mike's. Actually, David was calm and straightforward, but I could see his brows furrow as I explained the situation. He didn't sugarcoat things, which I respected. He told me bluntly that custody battles could get ugly, especially when there was an affair involved. He warned me to document everything and to stay level-headed, especially around the kids. But the hardest part was keeping up the appearance of normalcy for Tyler and Sophie. They were too young to understand what was happening, too innocent to see the bitterness simmering beneath the surface. Emily and I were still taking turns with school pickups and drop-offs, and each time I saw her, it was like a punch to the gut. She'd waltz into the house, radiating this newfound freedom, while I was left picking up the pieces of our shattered family. One evening, after Emily had dropped the kids off, I caught Tyler looking at me with a worried expression. "Dad, are you mad at Mom?" he asked quietly, his small hands clutching the edge of the dinner table. The question hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't lie to him, but I also couldn't drag him into the mess Emily had created. I took a deep breath, forcing a smile. "No, buddy. Mom and I just don't agree on some things right now. But that doesn't change how much we both love you and Sophie, okay?" He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Kids are perceptive, more than we give them credit for. And no matter how hard I tried to shield him from the truth, I knew he sensed the tension. After putting the kids to bed, I sat alone in the quiet house, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. The anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak. It was all there, heavy and unrelenting. And that's when a thought crossed my mind, something that had been eating away at me since our last confrontation. What did I really know about Adam? I knew he was Tyler's soccer coach. I knew he was somehow understanding Emily in a way I supposedly never had. But beyond that, he was a mystery. And that mystery gnawed at me. Who was this man who had so easily stepped into my family, so casually inserted himself into my wife's life as if I was just a placeholder? So, I started digging. I didn't feel guilty about it. In fact, I felt justified, maybe even obligated. If this man was going to be around my kids, I needed to know exactly who he was. I went online, sifting through social media profiles, local news articles, and anything else I could find. It didn't take long to find his Facebook profile, and it was as cliché as it got. His cover photo was a sunset, his profile picture a candid shot of him laughing at some party, drink in hand. His posts were all about living life to the fullest, sprinkled with motivational quotes about seizing the day. But what caught my eye was a recent post tagged with a location. A bar about an hour out of town, the same place Emily had told me she was meeting friends a few weeks back. The anger bubbled up again. Here was proof, tangible evidence that she'd lied, that she'd been seeing him while spinning her stories about catching up with friends. I clicked through his photos, trying to keep my emotions in check, until I stumbled upon a picture that sent a chill down my spine. It was a photo of him wearing a bracelet. A white bracelet with a single black bead. A perfect match for the one Emily had started wearing. She told me it was from her best friend, then changed her story, saying it was from her mom. Now, I finally had the truth. It was a gift from Adam, a twisted little token of their bond. Something she wore right in front of me every day as if it meant nothing. The rage that surged through me was overwhelming. I'd been patient, I'd been civil. I tried to keep things amicable for the sake of our kids. But this was a slap in the face. She hadn't just betrayed me. She was flaunting it, daring me to confront her again. The next time we met to discuss the kids' schedule, I couldn't hold it in anymore. As soon as she walked in, I held up my phone, showing her the picture of Adam with his matching bracelet. Care to explain this? I asked, my voice barely controlled. Her face flickered with something. Guilt, maybe, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same cold indifference. John, this is exactly why I couldn't be with you. You're obsessed. You can't let anything go. Yes, he gave me the bracelet. So what? We're close. We have a connection. But you stalking him online? That's pathetic. Pathetic? I nearly laughed, though there was nothing funny about any of this. You're calling me pathetic for trying to understand the man you're dragging into my children's lives? The man who broke up our marriage? She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. Oh, please. Our marriage was over long before Adam. You just refused to see it. And now you're acting like he's some villain, when really, he's done nothing but support me. The sheer audacity of her words left me speechless. She was rewriting history, turning our marriage into some tragic failure she'd merely endured, as if she'd been the martyr all along. I realized then that I would never get the apology I wanted, the remorse I hoped for. She would never admit she was wrong, never own up to the damage she'd caused. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Fine, Emily, believe whatever you want, but I'm not letting you drag Adam into my kids' lives without a fight. I'll see you in court if I have to. She smirked, a cruel twist to her lips. Do whatever you want, John. I'll win. I have every right to bring happiness into my life and into theirs. With that, she turned on her heel and walked out, leaving me standing there, fists clenched, heart racing. I'd been prepared for a tough fight, but this was war. After she left, I sat down, feeling utterly drained. It was as if she'd taken everything good we'd ever shared and twisted it, turning our memories into weapons to justify her betrayal. I couldn't let her rewrite the past like this, couldn't let her paint me as the villain in her story. I called David that evening, telling him everything I'd found, every lie she'd told. He listened patiently, then gave me the hard truth. Family courts were unpredictable, and if Emily could convince them she was the primary caregiver, I might lose custody. The thought terrified me. I couldn't stand the idea of my kids being raised by Emily and her new boyfriend, of them growing up in a home where loyalty and trust meant nothing. But David reassured me there were ways to fight back, ways to make sure my side of the story was heard. Stay calm, he advised. Don't let her bait you into losing your temper. Document everything. We'll make sure the truth comes out. His words gave me a sliver of hope. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't alone. There were people who saw through Emily's lies, who knew the truth about what she'd done. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept a little easier. The battle was just beginning, but I was ready for it. The days blurred together in a cycle of tense confrontations, lawyer meetings, and a suffocating anxiety that followed me everywhere. Each time I had to see Emily, each time we exchanged even the simplest words about the kids' schedule or pickup arrangements, I felt the simmering resentment just below the surface. I wanted to lash out, to make her feel some fraction of the pain she caused me, but I knew that's exactly what she wanted. An excuse to paint me as unstable, unreasonable. So, I stayed calm, keeping my anger under wraps, even when it felt impossible. But the longer this dragged on, the more desperate I became for anything that could tip the scales in my favor. I couldn't bear the thought of losing Tyler and Sophie, of seeing them only on weekends while Emily and her perfect life with Adam took over the role I'd dedicated myself to for years. So I took David's advice to heart and started documenting everything. Texts, emails, even receipts from places she told me she'd been but actually hadn't. And then one evening, I stumbled onto a gold mine. Emily's old laptop was still in my office. She'd stopped using it a year ago, switching to her new work-issued one. She'd never bothered to clear her old files or log out of any accounts. As I stared at it, I wondered if there was anything left behind, anything that might expose her web of lies. I wasn't disappointed. The laptop was logged into her email, and though she'd been careful to delete most of her recent messages, I found an archive folder she must have forgotten about. In it were messages from Adam, going back to the beginning of their affair. They were full of flirtations, declarations of love, and nauseating pet names. But it didn't stop there. She'd shared pictures with him too, photos of our kids, of our house, of private moments that should have belonged only to us. My stomach turned as I realized how easily she'd shared our lives with this man, how she'd let him into the most sacred parts of our family as if I didn't even exist. One message, in particular, was burned into my mind. She'd sent it a week after we'd had a fight about her late work nights. In it, she wrote, "John's so clueless. He actually believes all my work excuses. I feel bad sometimes, but I can't stop now. You're all I think about." Reading it felt like swallowing broken glass. She didn't just cheat on me. She mocked me, deceived me with this casual cruelty, enjoying every moment she was lying to my face. I copied everything, every email, every message. I knew I'd have to hand it over to David, that this was the kind of proof that might finally make a difference in court. But beyond the legal implications, the messages affected me on a deeper level. Every word felt like a fresh betrayal, a new wound. The next morning, I met with David, handing over a folder with printouts of every incriminating message and picture. He flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he looked up at me with a steely determination. "This is exactly what we needed," he said, tapping the folder. "The courts don't look kindly on parents who prioritize personal affairs over family, especially when they drag children into the middle of it. If she's introduced him to your kids under these circumstances, that's enough for a judge to question her judgment." David's words were a balm to my battered spirit. For the first time, I felt like there was a chance, an actual concrete chance, that I might come out of this with something resembling justice. Emily had been so brazen, so arrogant, believing she'd get away with it all. But now, she'd have to face the reality of her actions. A few days later, we had our first formal meeting with both lawyers present. Emily sat across from me, her face perfectly composed, feigning the innocence of someone who'd done nothing wrong. Adam wasn't there, but his presence lingered like a shadow. My lawyer opened the meeting by presenting the evidence we'd gathered, sliding the folder across the table for her and her attorney to review. I watched her expression shift as she flipped through the pages, her smug confidence faltering for the first time. She glanced up at me, a flicker of fear in her eyes, before quickly composing herself. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering to her, but it was clear she hadn't anticipated that I'd fight back with this much force. "John," she finally said, her voice tight, "is this really necessary? I thought we agreed to keep things amicable for the sake of the kids." "Amicable?" I said, unable to hide the disbelief in my voice. "You want amicable after lying to me, mocking me, dragging this man into my children's lives while sneaking around behind my back? No, Emily. I've done my part. Now you're going to face the consequences." She narrowed her eyes, her jaw tightening. "I see what this is. You're trying to make me out to be the bad guy. But the reality is, John, we were done long before Adam came along. You know that. You just can't accept that I moved on." I couldn't help but laugh, the bitterness spilling out. "Moved on? You mean lied, betrayed, and walked all over the life we built? That's not moving on, Emily. That's cowardice." Her lawyer cleared his throat, clearly sensing the tension. "Perhaps we should return to the matter at hand," he said. "Given the nature of this evidence, it might be best if we revisit custody arrangements. John has a legitimate concern regarding the involvement of third parties in the children's lives." Emily's face hardened, and I could see her struggling to hold back her anger. She wasn't used to being challenged, wasn't used to things not going her way. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "Adam is a good man, and he cares about our children. Just because John can't handle that doesn't mean I'm a bad mother." But her lawyer's response surprised me. "Emily," he said quietly, "I think we need to take this seriously. The judge will see these messages. It would be wise to negotiate before we proceed to court." She looked stunned, clearly not expecting even her own attorney to side against her. The room fell silent, and I could feel the shift in power, the realization dawning on her that she wasn't in control anymore. For once, she was the one who'd been blindsided, and she didn't know how to handle it. Finally, she turned to me, her voice laced with venom. "Fine, John. You want to play dirty? Then let's play dirty. But don't think for a second I'm just going to roll over." I met her gaze, feeling an unexpected calm settle over me. "I don't need you to roll over, Emily. I just need you to realize that actions have consequences. And for once, you don't get to decide what those are." We left the meeting without any agreements, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sliver of hope. Emily had always been able to manipulate her way out of trouble, always able to convince others that she was in the right. But now, the truth was out in the open, and there was no escaping it. As I drove home, a strange sense of peace settled over me. I didn't know what the future would look like, didn't know if I'd end up with full custody or joint custody or something in between. But I knew one thing. I was done letting her control my life, done letting her rewrite our story to suit her own selfish desires. When I got home, I hugged Tyler and Sophie tightly, grateful that they didn't fully understand what was happening, that they could still find happiness in the small, everyday moments. And as I held them, I made a silent promise to fight for them, to be the father they deserved, no matter what it took. The fight wasn't over yet, but I was ready for it. And for the first time in months, I believed that maybe, just maybe, I might come out on the other side stronger than before. The months that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, court dates, and exhausting nights. Emily's reaction to being exposed had been predictably vengeful. She dug in, fighting me every step of the way, accusing me of being unfit, of being obsessive and controlling. She'd even tried to paint me as emotionally unstable, claiming I was dangerous for the kids. But each time, David was there, ready to counter every false narrative she threw at us. He knew her game as well as I did, and his calm, relentless approach kept me grounded. The hardest part, though, was the toll it took on Tyler and Sophie. They were starting to pick up on the tension, sensing that something was terribly wrong. I could see it in their eyes, especially when Emily would tell them things like, "Daddy just needs some time alone," as if she was already conditioning them to think I was the problem. It broke me each time I heard her twisting the truth, planting seeds of doubt in their innocent minds. The court case dragged on, and every week seemed to bring a new development. Emily's lawyer had tried to fight our custody request by claiming she provided a stable environment and was the primary caregiver. But the evidence I'd collected showed the opposite. Her late nights with Adam, her flippant attitude toward family commitments, her attempts to make me look unfit while she prioritized her affair. David made sure the judge saw every email, every text, and every lie she tried to spin. And then, finally, the judge issued his ruling. I remember that day so vividly. Emily and I sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, both of us exhausted but refusing to look at each other. The judge went over the details of the case, recapping our marriage's slow disintegration, her documented affair, and her repeated attempts to shift blame. Then he looked at me, and I'll never forget his words. "Mr. Collins," he said, "it's clear to this court that you've gone above and beyond to provide a stable environment for your children, even under extremely challenging circumstances. Mrs. Collins' decisions have demonstrated a pattern of behavior that, at this time, does not reflect an ideal parental influence." He ruled in my favor, granting me primary custody of Tyler and Sophie. Emily was allowed supervised visitation, but only until she demonstrated a willingness to make decisions in the children's best interests. The courtroom fell silent as the judge finished speaking. I heard a sharp intake of breath from Emily, but I didn't look at her. I couldn't. I'd won, but the victory was hollow, tinged with a sorrow that I knew would take time to heal. After the ruling, Emily tried to confront me in the hallway. She grabbed my arm, her face a mix of fury and desperation. "You think this is over, John?" she spat. "You think you've won? You're just going to ruin them, ruin everything because you can't handle being alone." I shook my head, feeling a deep, tired sadness rather than anger. "Emily, it's over because you made it over. I didn't ruin this, you did. I only want what's best for the kids, and right now, that isn't you." She looked at me as if she didn't recognize me, and maybe she didn't. Maybe, in the end, we'd both become strangers to each other. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, trying to come to terms with what this victory actually meant. In the days that followed, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. I'd won, but the battle had taken its toll. Tyler and Sophie were adjusting to our new life, and I was doing everything I could to make things feel normal for them. We set up a new routine, one that was calm and predictable, free from the chaos that Emily had brought into our lives. One evening, Tyler came up to me, a serious look on his face. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" he asked, his small voice filled with a vulnerability that tore at my heart. I knelt down, meeting his eyes. "Yes, buddy," I said softly. "We're going to be okay. It's just us now, and I'm here for you and Sophie. We'll be okay, I promise." He hugged me tightly, and I felt a wave of gratitude, a sense of purpose that reminded me why I'd fought so hard. This wasn't about winning a battle or getting revenge on Emily. This was about protecting my kids, about building a future where they felt safe and loved. As the weeks turned into months, I started to feel the weight lifting, the pain gradually replaced by something gentler: acceptance. Emily continued to see the kids during her supervised visits, though her attitude remained bitter, and I often caught her trying to undermine me in small ways. But I'd learned to let it go. I couldn't change her, couldn't fix what had broken between us. All I could do was focus on the life I was building with my kids, the life that Emily had so casually discarded. Eventually, the memories of the betrayal began to fade. They were still there, like old scars that sometimes ached in quiet moments, but they no longer defined me. I was more than Emily's ex-husband, more than the man she tried to tear down. I was a father, a protector, and I'd come out of this ordeal stronger than I'd ever been. Looking back, I realized that the experience had taught me more than I'd ever expected. It had shown me the strength I didn't know I had, the resilience to fight for what truly mattered. And if I could offer one piece of advice to anyone going through something similar, it would be this: trust yourself. Trust that you're stronger than you know, that you're capable of surviving even the deepest betrayals. Life doesn't always go the way we plan, but sometimes the hardest trials bring us to places we'd never have reached otherwise. I may have lost Emily, but in the end, I gained something far more valuable: a deeper understanding of myself and a bond with my kids that nothing could ever break.